The night was silent except for the faint hum of the wind that blew through the lonely hills at the edge of the small town Sarah had once called home. She had married Jake 3 years ago, believing his charming smile and kind words. But the man she felt for had disappeared within months, replaced by a cruel husband whose anger burned like wildfire and whose fists spoke more than his words. He controlled everything, from what she ate to where she looked. And when she finally dared to fight back, he decided to punish her in a way no one would ever imagine. It was a moonless night when he dragged her outside, his breath heavy with alcohol, his eyes glowing with fury. She had broken a plate during dinner, and that was enough to spark his rage. He shouted curses as he pulled her through the backyard, where an old well stood hidden by weeds. No one had used it in years. Jake had often joked that one day he would toss something down there just to hear how deep it went. But Sarah never thought that something would be her. Before she could scream, he tied her hands with the rope, shoved her toward the edge, and with one last hateful glare, he whispered, "Enjoy the silence." Then he pushed. She fell into darkness, her body hitting the cold stones and muddy bottom. The pain spread through her, but worse was the silence above. She screamed for hours, calling his name, pleading for mercy until her voice cracked, but only her echo answered. She tried to climb, but the walls were slick with moss. She tried to rest, but the fear of snakes and the sound of dripping water kept her awake. The night turned to morning, and the morning to evening. She had no idea how long she had been there, when the faint rumble of engines reached her ears. At first she thought she was dreaming. Then she realized it was real, the sound of motorcycles growing louder. Miles away, the Hells Angels chapter leader named Cole Ryder was leading his men down the highway, heading back from a charity ride through town. Cole was a man of few words, his reputation fierce, his loyalty even fiercer. He had seen every kind of cruelty in his years on the road, but nothing shocked him anymore, or so he thought. As they passed through the deserted stretch near Jake's property, one of the bikers motioned to stop. Cole frowned but cut his engine. The rider pointed toward the old well by the field. They had stopped because they thought they heard a sound. Cole listened carefully, and there it was. A faint, broken cry for help carried by the wind. Without hesitation, Cole jumped off his bike and ran toward the well. He leaned over, shouting, "Is anyone down there?" And the weak, trembling voice of a woman came back, "Please help me." He grasped his flashlight and looked inside, and what he saw made his blood run cold. A woman, bruised and covered in dirt, sitting at the bottom like a ghost, trying to move. He turned to his men. "Get the ropes," he barked, and in minutes they had lowered one down. Cole climbed halfway inside, reaching out to her. "Take my hand," he said. She hesitated, too weak to believe it was real. But when his strong grip closed around her, she felt something she hadn't in years: safety. They pulled her out gently, laying her on the ground, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. "Who did this?" Cole asked, his voice calm but deadly. She looked at him, lips quivering. "My husband," she whispered. "He locked me in there and left me to die." Cole's jaw tightened. He looked toward the distant farmhouse, and without a word, he handed his men a silent order. "Stay with her," he said, and started walking toward the house. The others followed. The ground crunched under their boots, and the faint smell of gasoline and oil followed them like a warning. Jake was inside the house pouring himself another drink when he heard the roar of bikes approaching. He frowned, stepping outside with a bottle in hand. "What the hell?" he started to say, but froze when he saw the group of leather-clad men walking toward him. Cole at the front, his eyes like fire. Jake sneered. "What do you want?" he spat. But before he could blink, Cole grabbed him by the collar, slammed him against the wall, and whispered, "You left your wife to die in a hole." The bottle slipped from his hand, shattering on the porch. "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but the truth was written all over his face. Cole's fist came fast, cracking against Jake's jaw, sending him sprawling onto the dirt. The other bikers surrounded him, their engines still running in the background, the sound like thunder rolling through the valley. Jake tried to crawl back, but Cole grabbed him again, pulling him close. "You ever think what it feels like to beg for life in the dark?" he hissed. Sarah's voice still echoed in his mind, every cry, every gasp. The woman had been half dead and still fighting to live. He looked back toward where she sat, wrapped in one of the biker's jackets, trembling but alive. That was all that mattered. They didn't kill Jake, though they wanted to. Instead, Cole made sure justice would come a different way. They called the sheriff, an old friend who had seen enough of Jake's cruelty over the years, but never had proof. Now he did. When the police arrived, Sarah was already being treated by paramedics, her hands bandaged, her face pale, but her eyes alive for the first time in years. She saw Cole standing a few feet away, silent, watching as Jake was handcuffed and dragged away. Their eyes met, and she mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." He nodded once, then turned back toward his bike. That night, as the Hells Angels rode off into the distance, the sound of their engines echoing through the hills, Sarah stood by the ambulance watching them disappear, tears in her eyes. She had fallen into darkness and thought it was the end, but fate had sent angels. Not the kind with wings, but the kind with steel hearts and roaring engines. Cole never looked back, but deep down he knew that the woman in the well would never forget the night the Hells Angels heard her cry and rose from the darkness to save her from hell itself. The days that followed were hard, but healing. Jake was charged and his story spread through the small town. People whispered about how the bikers had come like ghosts out of nowhere to deliver justice. Sarah started a new life miles away, working at a diner, smiling at strangers, learning how to live again. Sometimes when she heard the distant sound of motorcycles, she would pause and close her eyes, remembering the hand that reached down into the dark and pulled her back to the light. And she would whisper a silent prayer for the man who heard her cry and turned the night into hope once more.